The modern-day battlefield is ever-changing, and as a platoon leader, you must efficiently and continually assess your surroundings. One tool in your arsenal to help you completely know your area of operations is to perform a terrain and weather analysis. As a platoon leader, it is crucial that you understand how terrain will affect operations. Understanding how different aspects of terrain and weather will influence not only your soldiers and equipment, but also how it will affect your enemies will help you to make much more informed and intuitive decisions. Essential to this task is the understanding of the basic terrain features, the military aspects of terrain, principles of map reading, and being able to apply them to conducting a proper terrain analysis. Taking this information and using it effectively to decide how you will conduct operations or predict how the enemy will conduct operations will better assist you in conducting successful missions and maximizing the effectiveness and utilization of your available forces and assets. Terrain analysis is very much so like the IPB process which the staff at your higher headquarters will be conducting. However, with the limited assets you have available, you as a platoon leader will have to utilize assets which you have available, such as COICEL, satellite imagery, Falcon View, TigerNet, Sydney, Blue Force Tracker, human intelligence, or your own first-hand knowledge of the area. Terrain analysis is a systematic and continuous process of analyzing the threat and environment of a specific area. It helps the platoon leader to selectively apply and maximize his combat power at critical points in time and space. It also helps you to determine what the threat's most likely course of action may be, and it describes the battlefield environment that your unit is operating in. Here you will define the characteristics of your battlefield environment that will influence your decisions or affect courses of action available to both friendly and enemy forces. Since we are focusing on the terrain, let us define a few doctrinal terms. The area of operation, or AO, which may also be described occasionally as the OE, or operating environment, is a geographical area, including the airspace above, which will be defined by lateral, forward, and rear boundaries. These are assigned by a higher command. This is the area where you have the authority to conduct military operations without having to coordinate with adjacent or higher units. The next term we will discuss is the area of interest, or AI. This is a geographical area that will include threats or characteristics of the battlefield environment which will significantly influence the accomplishment of your mission. We describe the AI in terms of acronym CAR. This acronym describes the primary characteristics that we look at for our terrain analysis. The C is referred to enemy air assets, both combat air support and close combat attack, be they fixed wing or rotary wing. The A is referring to indirect fire weapons, such as artillery or mortars. And lastly, the R is describing reserve forces which the enemy commander has the ability to employ on our objective. Now, let's take a moment and put this all together and demonstrate how this concept works. You are in charge of a platoon which has been given the task to occupy Taylor Field, which will be known as AO Dog. This is your area of operations. Now let's look at some of the areas that can directly influence your operations. The IBOLIC headquarters building, while it's not in your area of operations, and the HHC and Delta Company headquarters buildings would be considered areas of influence, since they have the ability to directly employ reserve cadre forces upon your AO. The second step in terrain analysis is identifying the battlefield effects. This is where we conduct a more inclusive analysis of the terrain and weather which affects our area of operations. At this point, we should also consider other characteristics of our battlefield, such as the population status, since they are part of the terrain. If you recall in your previous lessons on ASCOPE, this is where you would start considering it in your planning phase. As you consider these effects, you should remember to not only look at how they affect our forces, but also the enemy forces. The military aspects of terrain are described in the acronym OACOC, which means obstacles, avenues of approach, key terrain, observation fields of fire, and cover and concealment. We will discuss each of these in greater detail, as each piece is vital to your role as platoon leader conducting terrain analysis. Obstacles are any natural or man-made terrain feature that stops, impedes, or diverts military movement. They are classified as existing or reinforcing obstacles. Existing obstacles are classified as either natural, such as a large river valley, or man-made. Reinforcing obstacles are further classified as either tactical, such as a minefield, or protective in nature. Natural obstacles involve terrain, topography, and/or physical characteristics that affect or impede movement, while man-made obstacles involve human influence to affect or impede movement or arrangement. Reinforcing obstacles fall into two categories. The first is tactical, and these obstacles are employed to disrupt enemy formations, to turn them into a desired area, to fix them into position under direct or indirect fires, or to block enemy penetrations. Protective obstacles are employed to assist a unit in its local or close-in protection. As you learned during land navigation, there are 5 major terrain features: the hill, a ridge, valley, saddle, and a depression. There are also 5 minor terrain features: the draw, the spur, the cut, the fill, and the cliff. Now let's take time to look into each of these a little bit more. A hill is an area of high ground. From a hilltop, the ground slopes downward in all directions. A hill is shown on a topographic map as a series of contour lines forming concentric circles. Inside the smallest closed circle is the hilltop. A ridge is a sloping line of high ground. If you're standing in the center line of a ridge, you'll normally have low ground in 3 directions and high ground in 1 direction, with varying degrees of slope. If you cross a ridge at right angles, you will climb steeply to the crest and then descend steeply to the base. When you move along the path of a ridge, depending on the geographic location, there may either be an almost unnoticeable slope or a very obvious incline. Contour lines forming a ridge tend to be U-shaped or V-shaped. The closed end of the contour line points away from the high ground. A valley is a stretched out groove in the land, usually formed by streams or rivers. A valley begins with high ground on 3 sides and usually has a course of running water through it. If standing in a valley, 3 directions offer high ground, while the 4th offers low ground. Depending on its size and where a person is standing, it may not be obvious that there is high ground in the 3rd direction, but water flows from higher to lower ground. Contour lines forming a valley are either U-shaped or V-shaped. To determine the direction water is flowing, look at the contour lines. The closed end of the contour line always points upstream or towards the higher ground. A saddle is a dip or low point between 2 areas of higher ground. A saddle is not necessarily the lower ground between 2 hilltops. It may simply be a dip or break along a level ridge crest. If you are in a saddle, there is high ground in 2 opposite directions and low ground in the 2 other directions. A saddle is normally represented on a map as an hourglass. A draw is a less developed stream course in a valley. In a draw, there's essentially no level ground, and therefore little or no maneuver room within its confines. If you are standing in a draw, the ground slopes upward in 3 directions and downward in the other direction. A draw can be considered as the initial formation of a valley. The contour lines depicting a draw are U or V-shaped, pointing towards the high ground. A spur is a short, continuous sloping line of higher ground, normally jutting out from the side of a ridge. A spur is often formed by 2 rough parallel streams, which cut draws down the side of a ridge. The ground is sloped down in 3 directions and up in 1 direction. Contoured lines on a map depict a spur with U or V's pointing away from the high ground. When we are looking at the various terrain features, we also need to take into account the amount of slope associated with them. Slope is defined militarily as the rate of rise or fall of a terrain feature. This is important to note since some types of slope give an advantage to the defender and some types give an advantage to the offensive force. We must also once again consider what type of force you are, since steep inclines will affect soldiers' movement and some degrees of slope will slow, impede, or completely halt movement of military vehicles. As can be seen in the demonstration, you can see that these Bradley fighting vehicles are having difficulty traversing this slope and are moving at a much degraded speed, while the infantry is moving along the same terrain without degradation of speed nor mobility. There are 4 types of slope. They are uniform gentle, uniform steep, concave, convex. Now let's discuss the 4 different types of slope and some of their associated advantages and disadvantages. With a uniform gentle slope, it allows the defender to utilize grazing fires effectively and forces the attacking force to move up the incline. As you see in this video, with the limited cover provided for the enemy forces, the infantry team is able to quickly destroy them. Like the uniform gentle slope, a uniform steep slope allows the defender to utilize grazing fire, but requires the attacking forces to have to negotiate a much steeper incline, which further places them in the line of fire of the machine gun. A concave slope allows the defenders to view the entire slope and the terrain below, giving them a marked advantage over the attack force, but he is unable to use grazing fires. The attacker will have no cover from the defender's observation fire, and his climb up the slope will become more difficult the further he goes. we look at a convex slope, we see that the defender can only see a short distance in which he may utilize grazing fire, but he cannot observe most of the slope or the terrain at the bottom. The attacker will have concealment on most of the slope. As he nears the top, the climb will get easier. Avenues of approach are any air or ground route an attacking force of a given size can utilize leading to its objective or to key terrain in its path. A mobility corridor is an area where forces will be canalized due to terrain restrictions. They allow military forces to capitalize on the principles of mass and speed. As you can see in the demonstration video, this company-sized element was moving in a line formation but had to change into a column due to terrain forcing canalization. The graph shows the doctrinal mobility corridors as you would find them in accordance with AR 34-130 Appendix B. Key terrain is any location or area whose seizure, retention, or control gives a marked advantage to either combatant. It is a conclusion, usually arrived after enemy analysis and course of action development, rather than an observation. For example, a prominent hilltop overlooking an avenue of approach might or might not be key terrain. Even if it offers clear observation and fields of fire, it offers nothing if the enemy can easily bypass it, or if the selected course of action involves maneuvering on a different avenue of approach. However, if it offers cover and concealment, observation, and good fields of fire on multiple avenues of approach, or the only avenue of approach, then it offers a definite advantage to whomever controls it. The infantry platoon leader must assess what key terrain is to the mission accomplishment. Another example of key terrain for an infantry platoon leader in an attack is high ground overlooking the enemy's reverse slope defense. Controlling this area can prove critical in establishing and supporting a support by fire position to protect a breaching force. Remember, you will depict this area as a purple circle with a K inside of it. Observation is the ability to see a threat either visually or through the use of surveillance devices such as night vision goggles, thermals, etc. The infantry platoon leader identifies locations along each avenue of approach that provide clear observation and fields of fire for both the attacker and the defender. He analyzes areas surrounding key terrain, objectives, and engagement areas, and obstacles. He locates intervisibility or IV lines, which are ridges or horizons that can hide equipment or personnel from observation. He assesses the ability of the attacking force to overwatch or support movement with direct fire. Intervisibility line analysis enables the leader to visualize the profile of the terrain when only topographic products, maps, are provided. In analyzing fields of fire, he considers the friendly and enemy potential to cover avenues of approach or key terrain, in particular with direct fires. He also identifies positions where artillery observers can call for indirect fire. The observer must observe both the impact and the effect of indirect fire. He analyzes whether or not vegetation will affect the employment or trajectory of the javelin or of 60mm mortars. It can do this by masking the target or reducing overhead clearance. When possible, the observer conducts a ground reconnaissance from both enemy and friendly perspectives. He might do it personally by map or with his subordinate units, or he could use assets and information provided by the infantry battalion's reconnaissance platoon. A platoon leader looks at the terrain, foliage, structures, and other features along avenues of approach and on objectives or key terrain to identify sites that offer protection from the effects of direct and indirect fires, and concealment or protection from observation. In the defense, weapons positions must be both lethal to the enemy and survivable for the soldier. Effective cover and concealment is just as vital as clear fields of fire. Cover and concealment can be either part of the environment or something brought in by the unit to create the desired effect. The platoon leader should not forget the consideration of concealment from aerial observation as well as ground observation. The Terrain Analysis Worksheet is a tool to better help you understand your environment and terrain, and to assist you in the creation of your graphical terrain analysis overlay. As you can see, the Terrain Analysis Worksheet is pretty straightforward and offers you the opportunity to evaluate each of the OACOC factors and how they will affect you and the enemy. And then in a common sense way, you come up with your deductions. This is the meat and potatoes of the Terrain Analysis Worksheet. If you can't decide what these effects are going to have, then you should go back and reassess your answers. When analyzing terrain, leaders should consider man-made features and their effects on natural terrain features and climate. Leaders should also consider the effects of man-made and natural terrain in conjunction with weather on friendly and enemy operations. In general, terrain and weather do not favor one side over the other unless one is better prepared to operate in the environment or is more familiar with it. The terrain, however, may favor defending or attacking. Analysis of terrain answers the question, what is the terrain's effect on the operation? Leaders analyze terrain using the categories of obstacles, avenues of approach, key terrain, observation, and fields of fire, and cover and concealment, the Ewacott factors as we've discussed previously. In order to graphically display our analysis, we will draw a Graphical Terrain Analysis Overlay, or GTAO. A good graphical terrain analysis overlay will serve you well when briefing your subordinates and higher headquarters. When drawing your GTAO, there are specific colors used for each aspect of terrain. Obstacles are drawn in green, avenues of approach are drawn in red. Although it is not doctrinal, you will sometimes see friendly avenues of approach drawn in blue. This is perfectly acceptable. Key terrain is drawn in purple. Observation and field of fire is drawn in black. When completed, you should have created two products, the first being your terrain analysis worksheet and the second being your graphical terrain analysis overlay. There are 5 major features of weather that have military implications and should be considered as part of your terrain analysis. We will discuss each of these in further detail. They are visibility, wind, precipitation, cloud cover, and temperature and humidity. As a platoon leader, you should identify critical conclusions about visibility factors, such as light data, fog, and smog, and about battlefield obscurance, such as smoke and dust. You should consider light data and identify critical conclusions about begin morning nautical twilight, or BMNT, sunrise, or SR, sunset, or SS, end evening nautical twilight, EENT, moonrise, MR, moonset, MS, and percentage of illumination. Some additional visibility considerations include, will the sun rise behind my attack or in my eyes? Will I attack towards the sunrise? How can I take advantage of the limited illumination? How will this affect friendly and enemy target acquisition? Will the current weather favor the use of smoke or obscurance during breaching? When are night vision devices ineffective? Winds of adequate speed can reduce the combat effectiveness of a force downwind as a result of blowing dust, smoke, sand, or precipitation. The upwind force usually has better visibility. CBRN operations usually favor the upwind force. Wind-blown sand, dust, rain, or snow can reduce the effectiveness of radar or other communication systems. Strong wind and turbulence limit airborne, air assault, and aerial intelligence collection platforms and aviation operations. Evaluation of weather in support of these operations requires information on wind at the surface as well as at varying altitudes. Near the ground, high winds increase turbulence and may inhibit maneuver. At greater altitudes, it can increase or reduce fuel consumption. Wind is always described as from to, as in winds are from the east moving to the west. Precipitation affects soil trafficability, visibility, and the functioning of many electro-optical systems. Heavy snow cover can reduce the efficiency of many communication systems, as well as degrade the effects of many munitions and air operations. As a platoon leader, you should identify critical factors such as type, amount, and duration of precipitation. Some precipitation questions to answer include, how will precipitation or lack of it affect the mobility of units or of enemy forces? How can precipitation or lack of it add to the unit achieving surprise? Cloud cover affects ground operations by limiting illumination and solar heating tunnels. Heavy cloud cover can degrade many target acquisition systems, infrared guided munitions, and general aviation operations. Heavy cloud cover often canalizes aircraft on avenues of approach and on the final approach to the tunnel. Partial cloud cover can cause a glare, a condition that attacking aircraft might use to conceal their approach to the tunnel. Some types of clouds reduce the effectiveness of radar systems. As a platoon leader, you need to identify critical factors about cloud cover, including limits on illumination and solar heating of targets. Some cloud cover questions that you should ask are, how will cloud cover affect unit operations at night, and how will it affect them? How will cloud cover affect target acquisition of the command launch unit, and how will cloud cover affect helicopter and close air support? Extremes of temperature and humidity reduce personnel and equipment capabilities and may require the use of special shelter or equipment. Air density decreases as temperature and humidity increase. This can require reduced aircraft payloads. Temperature crossovers, which occur when target and background temperatures are nearly equal, degrade thermal target acquisition systems. The length of crossover time depends on air temperature, soil, and vegetation type, amount of cloud cover, and other factors. As a platoon leader, you should identify factors about temperature, including high and low temperatures, infrared crossover times, the effects of smoke and chemicals. Some temperature considerations you should include are, how will temperature and humidity affect the unit's rate of march? How will temperature and humidity affect the soldiers and the equipment? Will temperatures and humidity favor the use of non-persistent chemicals?